Shalom everybody. This is part 2 of our series covering the Sefer Torah of Mashiach. In part 1, we discussed the mystery of the 3 heads. We saw there the secret of the 72, 63, 45, and 52 names. How these related to the sections of the body, the head, the hands, the torso, and the feet. It's recommended you have watched part 1 first. I'll leave a link to that video in the comment section down below. In addition, a QR code has been created for this Sefer as it contains the mysteries of the Torah of Atzilus, which will allow us to unite within the lens of the divine and usher in true peace. World peace accomplishes when we recognize the divine not just in each other, but in everything. So with that being said, let us begin. We continue on page 6. Now the skull is in the secret of the 22 bones, which correspond to the heart spark. And it has been explained and made known to you the matter of the 7 sparks that emerge from the heart spark, forming 7 holes, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and the mouth. And they are the letters Shin, Tet, Nun, Ayin, Zain, Tzadi, and Gimel, and the secret of Satan Azgetz. Satan, a strong spark. Now this refers to the hard spark, which is the 231 gates. And in the process of emanation, the head of the Atik is formed by the hard spark, which are these 231 gates. We learn from this that as the skull of the Atik is formed by the 231 gates, which is formed by 22 letters, interacting with each other, Aleph with every letter and every letter with Aleph, creating 231 possibilities, we find that the human skull also has precisely 22 bones. And the 7 kings of Edom, which emanate after this, or emerge from the heart spark, are the secret of the letters Shin, Tet, Nun, Ayin, Zain, Tzadi, and Gimel. These form 7 sockets in the skull, and thus we find in the head there are 2 eyes, the nose with 2 nostrils, the holes in the 2 ears, and the mouth, and collectively they are 7. We can see this being discussed here on the adjacent page, as well as the kings of Edom that died. This is a very powerful concept that is discussed in many places inside of the Lurianic Kabbalah. These kings refer to these initial letters, Shin, Tet, Nun, Ayin, Zain, Tzadi, and Gimel. For essentially, the process of emanation begins with the emanation of the letters themselves, and that the letters themselves are in the secret of the body of the Atik. They are called kings who died without weapons because weapons refer to these tagin. And these three tagin appear precisely on 7 letters, and these are them. This concept is expounded in both the Zohar and the writings of the Arizal and in Esoteric at great length. We can see them here mentioned in Sefer Eitz Chaim Shabagan. On page 89, we see the list. It says, the letters which are the vessels of Zerampin and Nukva, the 7 kings that perished with 3 tagim. We can see the tagim are the 3 lines above these 7 letters, and here they are Shin, Ain, Tet, Nun, Zain, Gimel, and Sadi. In book 17 of the Zohar, they are mentioned here in Naso, section 44. The 7 kings of the feminine principle who died. Rabbi Shimon goes back to the issue of the kings of Edom who perished, and he says that prior to the time of the corrections of the king were prepared, Atika of Atichin was constructing worlds and working out the corrections for existence. Now that we've discussed this principle in generalities, let us return to the discourse. The first amazing secret of creation we learn is that the skull or the hard spark, which is the skull of the Atika, the ancient one, is formed by the 22 letters, which are the 231 gates. In that corresponding to the skull of the Atik, our skull has exactly 22 bones. Now, we learn about the emergence of the 7 kings of Edom, which was the rectification or the bringing forth of the first 7 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. For before, these letters existed as unified principles, and now they would start to emerge as vessels. The first of these vessels are the letters Shin, Tet, Nun, Ayin, Zain, Sadi, and Gimel, as it was explained. They are personified by the 3 tagim. These are likened to crowns on top of the letters. Therefore, it is said the 7 kings of Edom in respect to this. We learn a great mystical secret about our reality, and that is that our skull has 7 holes. That is, the 2 eyes, the 2 nostrils, the 2 ears, and the mouth. And this corresponds with the head of the Atik. Going forward, there is a circular and a linear aspect to the tree. This will be touched on later. When the kings emerged, they emerged in the secret of Tohu, that is to say, one on top of each other. Corresponding to this, and the whiteness from which they emerged out of the supernal Simsum, which is the Hokmah of the Ancient of Days, corresponding to bone, we have precisely 7 bones in our neck. And this will be touched on later in the Torah of Mashiach. But with this understanding, we learned that the skull in the previous video, or the 231 gates, houses the brain. These are the fronts and backs of the Sfirot, the very secret of the heart spark. For there are 2 aspects to the heart spark. That in which it is its circular aspect corresponding to the skull, and that in which it relays to the fronts and backs of the Sfirot, which are likened to the 2 lobes of the brain that's housed inside of the skull. Even as the heart spark, when written in a circular fashion, contains in its mystery the fronts and backs of the letters as they relate to the fronts and backs of the Sfirot. So too the skull houses the 2 lobes of the brain. With this understanding, let us continue. Now the skull is in the secret of the 22 bones which correspond to the heart spark, and it has been explained and made known to you the matter of the 7 sparks that emerge from the heart spark, forming 7 holes, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and the mouth. And they are the letters Shin, Tet, Nun, Ayin, Zain, Sadi, and Gimel. In the secret of Satan Azgatz, Satan a strong spark. Corresponding to this is the nervous system, which spreads from the skull, an example of the heart spark, which houses the brains, the fronts and backs of the Sfirot, and it spreads into 7 trillion nerves. Thus there are 7 trillion nerves in the body, and they are in the secret of these 7 sparks that emerge from this place. And this is in direct connection with precisely the 7 kings. The restriction is the secret of the mind, and the heart spark is the secret of thought. This refers to the withdrawing of the initial Tzimtzum, which is the secret of the mind, and the heart spark is the secret of thought. This being the secret of the two halves of the brain, as it was mentioned here. As it is written, in the beginning when Israel, the 231 gates or the heart spark arose in thought, for Israel contains the letters Yod, Shin, Resh, Lamed, Aleph, the substance of 231. And this substance is the brain. It has been made known to you that the brain is divided into two halves, and this is the secret of the 22 letters arranged in the front and backs of the Sefirot. Thus we find that the letters are the roots of the brain and that the brain is housed in the skull. It was explained the great mystery of the skull, being the heart spark. And the secret of the heart spark is that it is rooted in the pattern of the 11 fronts and the 11 backs of the Sefirot, which are the 22 letters. This is the secret of the two halves of the brain. And just as the heart spark contains in its mysteries the fronts and backs of the Sefirot, the skull of 22 bones contains in its mystery the two halves of the brain. It was explained that the heart spark was a result of the restriction, and so we find two things: the 22 letters at the smallest levels, and this is the 22 pairs of chromosomes in the human DNA. This is divided into two aspects. As in the restriction, there are two aspects: the straight light, which is the 22 letters in a linear aspect, and the heart spark, which are the 22 letters in a circular aspect. The light of the withdrawal, forming the three heads, was in the secret of the 22 letters. Thus, we should not actually imagine that the 22 letters were in this place, but rather that all of their principles were in the mystery of a unified singularity. And we find that, as it was explained in the first video, the restriction is consistent of two aspects. We find the withdrawal was from every direction precisely in the center. This forms the heart spark. And there's a linear aspect to the Sephiros, which was discussed in the 72, 63, 45, and 52 names. Thus, we also find in the secret of the linear Sephiros and the circular Sephiros, an example, the heart spark and the linear light, there are two aspects of the 22 letters. We find them at the smallest level. The heart spark was at the smallest level precisely in the center of the restriction, and we see the evidence of this in the 22 pairs of chromosomes in human DNA. We find regarding the linear light that there are also 22 aspects, and they are as explained as follows. Corresponding to the straight light of which the 22 letters entered the restriction is the human DNA with its 22 chromosomes that are emanated as the physical manifestation of the 22 letters in the linear form. That is to say, when the light of the endless poured into the restriction, it did so in the secret of the Or Yashar, or straight light. And we find that in accordance to this is the human DNA in a linear fashion comprising 22 chromosomes. And corresponding to the heart spark, we find that everything at the smallest level is circular and revolving. Accordingly, we find the 22 letters in the secret of the mitochondrial RNA. Human mitochondrial DNA consists of 37 genes. These gene codes for the 13 polypeptides that are part of the respiratory chain, as well as 22 transfer RNAs, tRNAs, and 2 ribosomal RNAs. Thus we see a linear aspect and a circular aspect. It was explained and made known that the restriction was from all sides and gathered precisely in the center. We learn from this, at the highest level everything is circular, and at the lowest level everything is circular. The surrounding endless would enter this vacancy, creating the straight light, and this would occur in the secret of the 22 letters. And so there is a linear aspect of the Sephiros and a circular aspect of the Sephiros. Thus, human DNA is formed from 22 letters via 22 chromosome pairs in the linear aspect, and the mitochondrial RNA forms in a circular aspect according to the hard spark and contains 22 transfer RNA. Thus, we see inside of the human body are the secret of the human DNA and the mitochondrial DNA. The human DNA is the secret of the linear light of the 22 letters. This is the secret of the linear construct of the human DNA. And we find the mitochondrial DNA is circular and also at the smallest level, as it was explained. This is all in the aspects of the generating atik. For he who knows the beginning knows the end, for the end of all things is to be found in the beginning. The end of all things is the physical manifestations of existence, and they are to be found in the beginning of all things, that is to say, the process of emanation, mainly of the ancient atik, and all of the mysteries of creation are to be found in this secret chamber. Regarding the withdrawal, or the Simsum, we find at the highest level everything is revolving, and so we find planets are orbiting stars via concentric circles, and at the smallest level we find that atoms are revolving in the same likeness. And everything in between the highest and lowest are linear. This teaches at the highest level and the lowest level everything is circular and revolving, and everything between is linear. Moreover, that which is linear will be composite of circular aspects, while existing within larger circular aspects. Now the hard spark is the secret of the atom, as was demonstrated above, and so there are 7 billion atoms in the human body. This is because the hard spark produced 7 sparks, so we find this in the secret of the atoms, as with 7 trillion nerves explained earlier. The base principle, we learned that the endless withdrew from all directions, forming a circular aspect. And at the smallest level, it gathered into the hard spark, another circular aspect. We learned at the highest level of existence, everything is revolving in circular aspects. This is the secret of planetary orbits. And at the lowest level, we find everything is also circular. And this is the secret of DNA and the atom. We find that in between the highest and lowest levels, everything is linear. This is the straight light that would enter in, creating the form of a man. This was explained in part 1 in the linear sphirot. We thus find at the highest level everything is revolving, and at the lowest level everything is revolving, but everything in between the highest and lowest level is linear. Not only is everything linear, in example the linear tree shown here, for example the human body, but that the human body, which is a linear aspect, is composite of revolving aspects, in example atoms, while simultaneously existing within a larger revolving aspect, an example, planets that are orbiting. Now, we know the hard spark is in the secret of the 7 kings of Edom. Just as we learned that the brain sends 7 trillion nerves throughout the body, we learn that the atoms, which is the revolving aspect of the smallest level, composites the body in 7 billion atoms, as shown here. Consider how miraculous that is. It was explained to you that the hard spark is the secret of the atom. At the smallest level, everything is circular. And see how it's precisely connected to the number 7. And consider how the skull housing the brain moves to 7 trillion nerves. All of these things are exactly precise because this is the Torah of the Atik, the Torah of Atzilus, and it brings about world peace by connecting one to know thyself, to know the self, to know the divine, to know the ancient Holy One, and to behold his great glory in reality. We will conclude this video here, part 2, with these amazing secrets. Consider how everything at the highest level is revolving, everything at the lowest level is revolving. Take time to look at the planetary orbits. Look at the atoms' revolving aspects. Consider how everything in between the highest and lowest levels is linear. Consider how you have 22 bones in your skull, why there are 7 holes in your skull. Consider how the 2 halves of the brain are housed inside of the skull. Consider how the brain moves to 7 trillion nerves precisely. Consider how there are 7 billion atoms in the body. Consider how as everything at the highest and lowest levels are circular, everything in between is linear, and that the linear aspects are formed by smaller revolving aspects. An example, the human body, which is linear, is composite of revolving atoms existing inside of a larger revolving aspect, an example, planetary orbits. And consider how this is precisely in this mystery as well, that linear aspects are composite of these circular aspects. That is enough for part 2. Carefully contemplate these very profound truths regarding ourselves in the Atik, and let us see the divine in each other, reality, and everything in existence. And let us begin the process of correction to end division and bring forth true, lasting peace by seeing and beholding consciously with our eyes. As it is written, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. As David HaMelech said, open my eyes that I may behold the wonders of your Torah. Shalom and Selah.